And Daniel, thank you so much. Daniel is a Filipino-American biochemist and climate scientist working on water and carbon cycles, assistant professor of the Earth, environment and planetary sciences. I just thought I'd check and see if you were listening. At Brown University. And in the Philippines, yay! His research group currently monitors numerous cave systems, which is, I can see, a future piece.
That's right.
And is working to produce records of past climate using stalagmites over the last 200,000 years. But that's not what we're going to talk about now. Susie, this was so, I had such a visceral experience tonight because I really felt the sense of sky islands and a rainforest, which I think in rehearsals, I just kept listening to each part and something about the whole coming together tonight. And I know you work a lot with environments and the inspiration they bring. Could you say a little bit about the evolution of this piece and what has inspired you?
Sure, thank you, Rachel. Sky Islands. Well, I think there's something very special that happens when we are able to get into a landscape that is really tall, and that's something that I like to be on field and record also, but different kinds of natural materials of the landscape. But I feel it's very magical. It's one reason why sometimes we go up to these tall places and you have the temples are built very tall in some of the mountains. So this particular mountain region, well, our family is a little from south of that, but in this northern island, Luzon. And then my father, Daniel's lolo, is from above Manila so his family's from Pampanga and also Tarlac, which is a meeting place of Kalinga, Aita, and Ilocano. And then you've got the Cordillera regions, and it's very special, these mountain rainforests, because they're up very high. And I was so intrigued by it because things happen differently than if we're in rainforests that are lower. And
so it's really these rainforests that are at our high levels, high altitudes.
It's high altitude culture. The music culture from there is also very different. We have gongs and bamboo that are played. The music is very different from like the lowlands and music that's come off from the rivers and the seas. But also in this high culture, like non-anthropogenic culture, it's very magical. I felt because of the animals and the mammals that we'll talk about it, that some people say that evolution has sped up here because it's hard to get there as humans, but we have all of these special animals that don't exist anywhere else in the world. So I think about that, being in the clouds, and
very
also
specific sounds that come from that environment.
Yes, the ecosystem, the sonic ecosystem of a rainforest. Yeah, it's very lush. So it is very inspirational.
So I think to help all of us understand what are sky islands, Daniel, I'm going to turn to you, and if you can give us a short, I know this is a challenge when you're a scientist, but something that we can really understand what sky islands are and start to take that in a more physical way.
Sure, yeah. I'll sort of talk about the biogeography. So sky islands, they're not an island themselves. They're due to their elevation, they are essentially an island on their own within a larger island, and the Philippines has a lot of them. They originally were sort of described in Arizona and Nevada, sort of the use and the term of sky islands, but Southeast Asia actually has a lot of sky islands because of the relatively tall mountain ranges in places like Luzon.
And what makes them a sky island? Why are they an island?
Well, they're an island because they're actually physically isolated, as I'll show on a couple of the maps. Going back to the clouds, I picked this first image here on the right of the islands of the island of Luzon, and you can actually see that the topography of Luzon helps create this sort of orographic effect that leads to the clouds that sit over the Central Cordillera, which is that sort of northwest part of the Luzon Island. And you can really see that over that mountain range, as well as another one known as the Zambales Range, just northwest of Manila.
So lead us through this next part so that we can kind of follow the journey here.
Yeah, so obviously on the left, the Philippines sits on the sort of the east side of the South China Sea, and Luzon is the furthest north of the large islands of the Philippine archipelago. And as a result, it's influenced by two monsoon systems. And here you can kind of see the summer monsoon on this big image of Southeast Asia. And the summer monsoon, is basically from July to about November of every year. And then when we zoom in on Luzon, this is what, these very montane rainforests look like in Luzon. And they're really an incredible place where you have really steep topographic gradients, but because of those steep topographic gradients, you also have gradients in temperature and rainfall, which lead to this diversification that Susie was talking about. And so this is another map, a more sciencey map here on the left of these sky islands. And if you look at the dark green areas, those are the areas above 1,500 meters, so 1.5 kilometers. And you can see now the Central Cordillera, the Zambales Range, which my group works on. And these are sort of the sky islands. And what they're actually really well known for in the scientific literature is these really cute mice and shrew and things like this, because they're endemic to this region. And these sky islands that are completely sequestered from the neighboring other mountain ranges have basically developed these really interesting ecosystems that people from the Field Museum in Chicago and ecologists, from the Philippines have really documented really quite well how the climate gradients in these mountain ranges have led to these really unique mice. And this was my favorite one from a blog that I found, the long-whiskered tree mouse. You can barely see it on the image, but it has whiskers almost the length of its body going up to the left on that photograph.
Looks pretty cute. Are they endangered? Is this an endangered area?
So some of these areas they're endangered for two reasons. One is climate change. So we have warming in this region, and in general, the sea level areas in the Philippines are warming approximately similar to the global average. So far we've seen about 1 degree Celsius of warming over the last century. But at higher altitudes, just like at the poles of our planet, warming is faster. And so as a result, these ecosystems are under threat. Additionally, you have issues of deforestation and land use, particularly in that western mountain range, the Zambales Range, which is one that I work in. There's other activities such as mining that's causing harm to some of these ecosystems.
So some of the images that are in the Coal and Ice exhibition resonate, I would suppose.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. So, let's come back to this. Yeah, Susie? Okay, we'll come back to this. So here's one example of the sort of the endemism that exists in these mountain ranges. So this is a plot. The x-axis is elevation going up to 3,000 meters, and the y-axis is the number of species. And these are number of native species, excluding bats, because bats will travel between mountain ranges and are not endemic to these different mountain ranges. And the little numbers are the number of actual species that are endemic. So they're unique to that transect, that mountain range that scientists have done these really careful surveys of. And so you can see as you move up in elevation, the percentages go up, as well as the total number of native species. And so this is a really nice example of how the climate gradient and these unique ecosystems caused by the elevation and the isolation of these mountain ranges leads to this endemism in this case, mammals.
And you've spent a lot of time in this area?
I have, yeah. So my group studies the Zambales Range. Like I mentioned, we do research on the rivers there, studying basically how nutrients are generated in rivers, and then we study some of the cave systems in and around this area to reconstruct past climate. Oh, we can go, yeah, I guess we're going out of order, but that's fine. And this is one of those cave systems. So this is Kalau Cave. This is in northeast Luzon in an area known as Cagayan. And my postdoc is there for scale. This is a very large cave and a relatively famous cave system. And these are stalagmites here on the right. So these stalagmites record time, right? Just like an ice core or a tree ring. And we can reconstruct how the ecosystems have changed through time. So we can look at different chemical markers in the stalagmites to understand how the vegetation has changed over time. And then we can also reconstruct rainfall and temperature using these stalagmites.
So maybe we should go back now to the cultures and peoples that live in these areas, which you have some wonderful images.
Sorry. We have some here, Ifugao and Kalinga from the regions. You can see the nose flute, kulitong, which is the zither, which you see actually throughout the Philippines, but it's also here in this region. Tonatong, which they take these bamboo, they're often sometimes shorter, and it's flat gongs, gangsa, so it's almost like drums, but it's metal, the gangsa, which is different than the gangsa in Indonesia. But these are actually the flat gongs, which they use a lot for procession. And it's very symbolic. So I definitely wanted to have these kinds of sounds and materials which are intentional to give that energy into the piece. So often, they'll say, okay, bamboo is used to play in these interlocking rhythms, traditional artists and my traditional artist friends to connect to the spirits. But I was just having this conversation today. I think even in contemporary music, we're always connecting. It's just that in traditional music, they'll literally tell you that, all music and all of their instruments, whether it's in their dreams or in their waking life. Yeah.
It felt like you created an ecosystem that was very specific on the stage. That's what was so magical. Even playing the plants, and how they all came together was, the texture and weave of that felt like it was kind of self-contained, and in a sense, that's how sky islands are defined. They're somewhat self-contained. So I'm just wondering if had you experienced that, and how did that sonic world affect your composing?
Yes, I didn't put any pictures in here from that because I happened to have with other traditional groups with my family earlier, and but I have experienced that working with artists both in the city and in the provinces. And it stays with you, right? It stays with you just like lifelong friends and colleagues, but also the experiences, it stays with you. But first of all, thank you for saying that. I couldn't do that without an incredible ensemble on stage. They make the ecosystem, so yeah.
Yes, and I know
absolutely.
those musicians are in the hall, so, kudos to all of you, because working very quickly, all coming together on this stage was kind of magical. And Daniel, I'm wondering if you have experienced that in a sonic way, or have you thought about your experience in the rainforest, in the field, having that quality?
I think for me, it's most noticeable when you drive to some of the field sites that you go through and you see the changes in the landscape. For me, it's sometimes more visual, because it's interesting in these places of high elevation. Sometimes, because of what the bedrock is, you actually lose some of that rainforest character and the vegetation becomes, less dense. And for me, as sort of someone who's trained as an earth scientist, I'm thinking about the elevation, the ecosystem, the plant types that are there, and how they represent all those different processes. But certainly, I mean, you sort of experience it as you travel through the landscape and as I've crossed some of these mountain ranges. And in fact, last summer got lost in one of the mountain ranges with one of my graduate students and another student from the University of the Philippines.
That sounds a little scary.
Yeah, well.
Lost in the rainforest.
Turns out you probably shouldn't trust Google Maps.
Good point. I'm just thinking, Susie, in a broader way, because you have this passion for science and a curiosity. And I've just been reading your book, Rhythm in Nature, which is wonderful, which we will have hopefully on sale when we have the premiere. But that whole notion of source, is it source to soil? To sink, source to sink. Could you say a little bit more about that concept?
I could try. Maybe Daniel could
Sure.
expand on that. But my experience in that has always been with water and glaciers. So from where the source is at the top, all the way down the mountains, through the rivers, out to the sink, to the sea or the ocean. So that's kind of my experience working with scientists and sound teams, experience that kind of terrain. But with the climate changing, it's never been source to sink for me to sonically map it. It's really sporadic because of the way the climate is changing. I have to map it in different moments and different terrains. It's really like a polyrhythm, and you can't guess it. Like you can't put it into a linear form. Even though we talk about it, source to sink, it sounds like, oh, it should just be this line that moves. But I think the climate change has made it actually really complicated with landslides and stuff.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up one region. Let's see if we can go back. So if you know where Manila Bay is there, going up towards Zambales, the westmost mountain range, in the southern end of that is Mount Pinatubo, which of course erupted in 1991. And the landscape in that area is still adjusting from all of the tephra and ash that was erupted from that large volcano in a sort of source to sink fashion. And it's amazing. I've gone back for field season since 2018, 2019, and driven the same highways from Manila, moving northward to Zambales and then further north to the northeast. And every time you drive, the catchments in the landscape change and they look different because one monsoon season moves a whole bunch of additional ash through that system, and the landscape is just still geomorphically adjusting to to that eruption, as an example.
So the concept source to sink, can you give us a little bit more of a description of what that refers to?
Yeah,
and how it changes?
I guess for me as someone whose original training is in geology, it starts with the hard bedrock being uplifted into its source, the mountain range, and then being eroded down through some river system, and then eventually into the coastal sediments that you have, off of any continent or any island. So it's sort of that process of the rock cycle that we think about, with rocks uplifting, being physically and chemically eroded by the water, the climate that mountain range is experiencing, and then the transport of those sediments.
So Susie, when you say you map this, I think for many people in the audience, they're really curious, what is it you're mapping? Because that's such an intrinsic part of your work.
Oh, lots of things. But I'm also mapping climate changing, collecting its memory. Every time I'm in a landscape, whether it's the land and or the water landscape, it'll never be the same,
And that mapping is through the sound as well as the topography?
Yes, through the sound. mostly. And like I will be in this coming week, it'll be it's a full art team actually this time. It's a sound team and visual artists that we're going up into the Himalayas. And Sikkim. I'm finishing some field sound research with Nat Geo storytellers. Yeah.
So did you all catch that? I'm just saying, we just went from Luzon, from the rainforest, to the Himalayas and the glaciers.
Yeah, the glaciers.
And the mapping is recording the glaciers?
Recording the water.
Recording the water?
Yeah, I record water. But now also with this, there's a lot of bamboo in the Himalayas. Like, I was so surprised. I didn't know in South Asia how much bamboo it was like Southeast Asia. And that was just a magical surprise. And also because with the sound team, they record a lot. We record a lot on contact with trees. So there'll be some of that too, and the endemic birds. I think it'll be more like a little sinfonietta because there's so much ecosystem.
Okay, now we're getting there.
I have
it's
four sound teams.
Yeah. One of the things that's really intriguing to me is this idea of recording. I mean, people have talked about Messiaen getting birds, but this is more of a whole ecosystem, and your work has been, when you say mapping, it's a sonic map. And you talked about Daniel. Now you've brought him over to the other side, to the art side. Not the dark side, the art side.
That's right. Susie can talk about it more, but one of our upcoming projects this August is we're going to start recording in the caves in Palawan, which is another island in the Philippines, and up in Luzon. So we're pretty excited about trying out, listening to the water dripping through the caves that are forming these stalagmites. And my team already puts out other scientific instruments, so recording devices seemed like a good idea.
So we're going to prep the science team for their sound recording, and also working out to see, because science has these incredible batteries, and we're seeing how far we can stretch that on long term with our recording devices. It's pretty exciting, actually. I'm excited about that.
Okay, Daniel, what do scientists have to learn from artists?
Interesting. I think observations, right? I think that at least my generation of scientists were very lab focused and computationally focused. But I think the thing I've learned from Susie and from other artists is sort of your observation of what's around you, and then how the work you do reflects that as scientists in our case.
And Susie, why are you so intrigued by science, and why are you bringing that into your work so strongly?
I like the languages in science. There's a lot of different languages, and I relate to it. I think it's something also like music that is multicultural. A lot of people can enter these lenses, listen, see it through, and can be from many different parts of the world, but can join that. Like music, science has that. Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you're both saying, in a sense, there are multiple interpretations that are available because you have different lenses that you're putting on. Would that be a fair way to describe this?
Sure.
Or is it unfair? No, I just want to. I definitely do want to put you on the spot. So I'm just curious what you would hope to get from those recordings in the caves, since that's something new that you're trying out. What might
so we've been monitoring some of these caves for 2 to 3 years now, and so we have these time series of cave CO2 or the drip rate coming through the cave. And so we can see the monsoon season and when the big typhoons or tropical storms come over one of these caves. And so for me, of course, we only get to go there a couple times a year. And really, as the professor, I only get to go maybe once a year. And so I want to hear what that's really like if you were to sit there in the cave for a long time, or in a river, or in, other
Can you
places.
tell them a little bit about these caves? Like how big, where you go in, and how far, and how big?
Yeah, well, they're all of different sizes. So some of them are really large, like this one. The Puerto Princesa Underground River is the second largest cave system in the world, and we go 8 kilometers in, and some of my students have actually slept in the cave overnight. But some of them are very small. They're these small, sort of 50 to 100 meter caves. So they're all sorts of different sizes, and what they are geologically is actually quite fascinating. They're before the Philippine archipelago uplifted, it was essentially a large coral reef, and so these caves they're made of bedrock that's about 15 to 20 million years old, and they're ancient coral reefs that have been uplifted since a time known as the Miocene, when the world was actually much warmer. It's one of the time periods we target to understand what future warming may look like for the Earth.
So my final question really has to do with the exhibition that we have up, and one of a primary area of interest for the Asia Society is sustainability and climate change. It's really important, and that's why I think it's so. I'm so grateful that you're both here, because I think it's how we speak across disciplines that becomes really important, and how we reach people. Susie, I really appreciated that you reached out with this project when we started talking about coal and ice. And it's clearly so relevant because, of course, when you think of climate change, it's both the grand scheme of the whole planet and also really small, discrete areas like a sky island. And I just think it's a real opportunity to be able to say something through music and through sound. We're going to be premiering the piece in July, and I'm just wondering if you would like to say anything about where the piece is going and what your hopes are for the piece.
Well, we're still in progress.
We're still in progress.
Yeah, and part of being on field, I think I've been talking about this, that going up on field, I think that the materiality of the sound is now coming into my composition, and so I'm negotiating that right now, how that changes my art form and how I can share that. So I'm casting in gong medals, Tambayok Philippine conch shells, that both Levi Lorenzo and I, and hopefully some of the other ensemble members will also play.
So these new sculptures will be part of the staging, is that right?
Yeah, and it's a concept for me that's titled Floating Gardens. So like sky islands and the whole kind of meta nature of bringing people in to sit or float into another space is a little moment to take us out of our regular space, everyday living, and experience something and think about it differently. And yeah.
Daniel, how do we change the world?
Well, I don't have the answer to
Through
that.
the science.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things we know we can do as individual actions, I would say, in terms of reducing our CO2 emissions, flying less, e-bikes, electric cars, sustainable actions that our corporations and government can impose. But I think, the more important thing for me is that while the climate is changing, there is a lot of hope to that. And if you look at the action that's been taken just since I was an undergraduate, a decade and a half ago, as one example, California is this summer essentially 100% wind, water, and solar. And so, we as a society can do it, and it's a matter of us doing it. right? And that's what I tell people, is that it's all about the will. We have the technological capability to, to sort of flatten the curve, so to speak, but with respect to climate change. CO2.
I think that music has the capacity to bring the emotional side to the rational, and so I'm hopeful, at least right now. I'm really looking forward to your world premiere, and it's an incredible group, and as I said, I feel like you've created an environment, so we're all looking forward to seeing where the piece is going. I want to thank both of you. Actually, though, we have a couple minutes. If we could bring up the house lights, if anyone has questions, we have a microphone right here.
Hi, good to see you, Susie. I have a question for Marilyn here. A question for David. I see the gongs and the kulintang, the 8 gong pieces. I'm quite fascinated with this here. Is there a special name for the 5 gongs and the 5 flat gongs? It's more of a technical question.
So the smaller ones are called sarunay, which are a smaller version of the kulintang. And so the gongs you see with the boss on top here, the 5 gongs, and over here are kulintang.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the flat ones have a different name, and the 5 gongs is part of a kulintang.
Yeah, the flat ones here are flat. Wait, which flat ones?
Well, it looks flat.
Please.
Oh, okay, the smaller ones. They're the sarunay. Yeah, they're the sarunay.
And I saw another question. Yes.
Susie, I was just curious in hearing that the music, which has an organic quality to, what is there a collaborative aspect to that music? In other words, your ensemble sort of developing that and responding to each other versus your composing it. I just wondered about the singularity of that, composing it versus the collaborative aspect of it in creating that music.
Thank you for that question. I couldn't create this music today without the entire ensemble. Everybody brings something to it, and it's very much a part of how I compose. Yeah, and this is a extended talking gong ensemble, which we have Claire Chase, Alex Bay, Levi Lorenzo is joining the extended talking gong, and Bergamo string quartet. But it's the seed is out of our trio, and why it might seem like it happened so fast is actually because it happened so long. That we've been playing music for a while, and we have in different contexts, so we have a language together that I can trust. They're going to understand it. They're going to bring so much to it. It's like if you have an idea, but if you collaborate with that idea, it's going to be so much larger than you could ever imagine, right? And so much more magical, because you have this whole ecosystem of incredible artists that are bringing these things to the stage. So there's a lot of collaboration in there, and I think it's also different kinds of composing. Sometimes the composition is on the page. Sometimes the composition is how we're collectively arranging the section. Every composer is different. I'm very open to how the performer is going to interpret it, and what their agency is and what is important, because I really want everyone to sound true to themselves and as the best possible. So I have to listen to that. I'm not going to force that.
Any more questions? Okay, so thank you so much for being here. I hope you will be here for the world premiere July 18th or 20th. And I hope that you also have an opportunity to see the exhibition Coal Plus Ice that will be on view until August 11th. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And particularly the musicians. Thank you.